Hello there. Welcome to the first week of August. And in case you're not quite aware, we're going to be talking about why you edit yourself in different rooms, right? Because we all know that there's a version of you that comes out in certain rooms that feel clear, natural, honest, and easy. And then there's another version of you that shows up somewhere else and suddenly you're being more careful or you're being more polished. You find yourself being more agreeable. Maybe you're more restrained. I know for some of y'all, right? Like you enter a room and you become more performative. And then sometimes, we find that we're more edited, we're more eager to be understood correctly. Um, we might become more aware of how our words are landing. Suddenly, we're more likely to shape our words around the room. I hear this a lot, and I just feel so much when people tell me, I'm a chameleon, right? Like I can shape myself around the room instead of around what is actually true for you. And a lot of people I know right now know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. And maybe it's you, but maybe it's, you feel most like yourself with certain people. Think about that. Maybe they're popping in your head right now. And then perhaps you feel least like yourself around other people, right? So get those juices flowing right now because this is really an important conversation, and I would imagine that things are already starting to pop up for you. Now, I think it is truly important that I make this note, right? Because I don't want you only thinking about your romantic or intimate relationships. I want you thinking about work, right? In leadership, in meetings, in boardrooms, right? But also in that family system. You may be one way at home with your immediate family, right? Like your spouse and children. But when you get around, say, your siblings and their kids, and right? Like that whole family system, you might be different. So I want you thinking about that. I want you thinking about your friendships and social spaces, how you feel in online spaces. How about the people you admire, the people you fear, the people you don't want to disappoint? Okay. How about the people who feel hard to read? What does that feel like? Right? With people who hold authority and with rooms that feel emotionally expensive. Um, you know, we have to think broader because it matters. And a lot of people think authenticity is simple, and it's not, right? Just be yourself, speak up, stop caring what people think, right? Like those things all sound really cool, right? They sound nice, but it's wildly incomplete, guys, right? It's just not a complete thing because most of us, right? Most of us adults, right? We're not moving through simple environments in our day to day activities, right? We're moving through complex human environments with power, with pressure, with expectation, judgment, politics, insecurity, performance, perception, and emotional history built into the room. So no, authenticity is not always simple. And if you've ever felt like, a different version of yourself shows up right? Depending on where you are, that doesn't automatically mean that you're being fake, but it does mean something is worth taking a look at. And so what I want to offer you here is this, okay? The problem is not adaptation. The problem is disconnection. And there's a line there. And look, some level of adaptation is normal, healthy even, right? You're not going to show up in a board meeting exactly the way you show up with your best friend. And you're not going to talk to a client the same way that you talk in your kitchen. And you're not going to bring that same tone to a hard family conversation that you bring to some casual conversation with someone who already feels safe, right? And so that's not a dishonesty. That's merely context, okay? So let's put a pin there and remember, like, what's the context? Right? Because adaptation becomes a problem when it starts costing you access to what is actually true. Okay. So if adaptation is based on context, that is different than adapting to fit in. Right. So when you stop being careful and start becoming edited. Okay. And what I mean by that is, I may be talking to somebody who is in an emotionally charged space right now. So that context may have me alter my delivery some, but doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to start editing myself as to not exasperate the situation, right? Like, so say somebody is upset with you and they're emotionally charged, etc. We may be careful about the tone and inflection that we meet them with, right? Hopefully to de-escalate things. But we're not going to edit to try to mitigate the situation, meaning hopefully sounding or saying what we think that person might prefer to hear, right? So when you stop being appropriate and start being performative, that's a problem. Okay. Meaning there's a lot of ways we could go with this, right? But say, you're in a professional setting and you start becoming performative and throwing jokes around, right? Because some of us do that. We start getting tongue in cheek and a little, I don't know, we try to be funny to divert the situation, right? So that may be an inappropriate adaptation. Or when you stop being thoughtful and start shape-shifting. If you're shape-shifting into, right, into something or somebody else, instead of being thoughtful, we can all enter a room where, and if I, was to pull, things that I find most people should keep personal and at home, right? Depending, on the situation. But if we're talking, if you enter a space and there's, a heavy discussion going on around politics or religion or something like that, where, it could get strained, if you stop being thoughtful and you start shape shifting to be something or think or feel or believe something different, then that's probably not the best thing, right? So you might want to stay thoughtful and maybe decline to enter the conversation, etc. Anyway, I could dive into this for a long time. This isn't a this isn't a one-on-one situation. But anyway, so when the version of you that shows up is so managed or so softened or so controlled or so protective that it no longer feels fully real, that's where people start to feel a kind of internal split. And a lot of them can't even name it clearly, right? They just know they're tired, right? They're tired of certain types of conversations. They're tired after a certain meeting, or they're tired after certain people, right? Maybe you're really tired after being in certain environments. And definitely that fatigue sets in after performing I don't know, what do we want to call it? Readability instead of actually living in congruence, right? So that's the real kind of exhaustion. Because editing yourself, if we're being honest, right, like that takes a lot of energy. Over managing how you're received, that takes a lot of energy, right? Trying not to seem like you're too much, right? Takes a lot of energy. Trying not to seem too direct or too emotional, that takes a lot of energy. And my goodness, let me tell you, trying to look easy, open, etc., when you're not easy in the moment, that takes a lot of energy. And when we're really trying hard to be quote unquote acceptable in every room that we walk into, man, does that really exhaust our energy, right? So what people often call social fatigue or professional fatigue or relational fatigue, right, is sometimes not just interaction fatigue. Sometimes it's the fatigue of self-editing. And I encourage everybody that talks to me about this topic, right, the fatigue of it all, I talk to them about what they're editing, right? Like, why is this so exhausting for you? Right? Like, if we show up as ourselves, open, honest, genuine, transparent, and authentic in all things that we do, right? It's not so exhausting. And so this is why this conversation matters so much. And I think one of the most useful questions that a person can ask themselves is, and actually I've got a couple. I'm going to give you two for now. We'll probably have more. But anyway, where do I feel most like myself? That's the first question. And the second question is, where do I feel most edited? Because if you answer it honestly, it starts to show you something really important. It starts to show you where your nervous system feels safer. It shows you where your self-trust is stronger, where your perceived risk is lower, where your need for approval gets louder, right? Where your fear of misunderstanding gets activated, where your personal image starts managing the room, and where your belonging or belonging needs start to cost you your own truth. Okay? So let's go a little bit deeper. Yeah? Why do people edit themselves? Maybe push pause. Write down some of your own answers. Why do people edit themselves? Right? Usually for one of very few reasons, right? They want approval, they want safety, they want belonging, they want access, right? They want to avoid conflict. They want to avoid being misunderstood. or being judged, right? They want to avoid looking difficult. They want to avoid looking emotional, awkward, intense, weak, needy, too much, not enough, right? In other words, the edited version of them is usually what? Protective. It's trying to do something. So this matters because the edited self is not random. It's strategic and it has a job. Again, you have to answer for yourself, and which means you have to be willing to do that, right? But this job that it has might be trying to protect your image, could be to protect your belonging, protect your professional identity, protect you from rejection, protect you from criticism, right? Protect you from the discomfort of being fully seen. That's a big one, right? So the goal is not to shame that part of you. It's just to understand it, right? Because once you understand what the edited self is trying to protect, you can stop treating it like your personality and start treating it like information. Big difference. Data versus this is just who I am. Big difference. And that's where the work starts to get really honest. Okay, so here's the next question. Who do I become in certain environments? Okay, so you maybe want to have a piece of paper, maybe write some categories, right? Social, personal, professional, however you want to break it down, right? And see, who do I become in these certain environments? Do I become smaller, sharper, more polished, over-explanatory, careful, performative, hidden, easy, impressive? Am I emotionally flat, hyper capable? That's a big one. Less opinionated? Am I more compliant, right? And what part of me gets left out there? That question matters. Okay. So we started with, right? Who do I become in certain environments? The second part there is what part of me gets left out there? And it's important because the real cost of self-editing is not just exhaustion. It's self-loss, right? Your opinion gets left out, right? If you're editing your opinion and trying to fit in, right, your opinion gets left out of the situation. Your boundaries get left out. Your real pace gets left out, right? If you jump in, you're all hands on, da 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 da, but in your soul, you have a much slower pace, right? Then your pace gets left out. Your discomfort gets left out. Your humor gets left out. Your emotional truth gets left out. And your actual no, right? Like, no, I don't think I want to get involved in this conversation, right? Like your no gets left out and your actual questions get left out, right? If you would normally be asking some open-ended clarifying questions, but you feel like you're going to be judged or something else, right? Like your questions get left out. So you don't get the learning, right? And then over time, people start saying things like, I don't know why I feel so disconnected. Right? Maybe you've said that, right? Like I've heard a lot of people tell me, like, I just feel disconnected from my life. I don't know why I feel so drained. I don't know why, but I definitely feel unseen. And I don't know why, but I don't trust myself fully when I get into certain spaces, right? A lot of time the answer is not a mysterious one. Okay, what we usually dig up is that the person's been editing themselves so consistently in certain environments that they've actually stopped experiencing their own full presence. Right? That's not confidence work. It's congruence work. And so that's what we're going to be working on this month, right? Not becoming louder, not saying everything that comes to our mind, right? Because sometimes we can go too far the other way, right? Not becoming emotionally loose and calling it honesty, right? It's okay to say, wow, did you mean for that to be so hurtful? But, if we do much more than that, right? Emotionally loose is more of a verbal vomit or an emotional, unloading, and we call it being honest when in fact, it's our nervous system just kind of unloading. And so, we really want to, again, be working on the delivery, etc. Right? So becoming more congruent, more readable, more honest, more internally aligned, more trustworthy with yourself, more aware of where you keep trading your truth for outside acceptability. As I'll be honest, right? Most of us don't need to become more authentic in some way, vague, decorative way. We need to notice where we're still shape shifting to survive in a space, in a room, in an environment. So that's, a different conversation, and it's a much more useful one. So I want to leave you with a few questions to sit with. Okay. I want you asking yourself, number one, where do I feel most like myself? Number two, where do I feel most edited? Number three, who do I become in those rooms? Number four, what is that version of me trying to protect? Number five, what part of me keeps getting left out? And six, what would more congruence actually look like for me? Right? Not recklessness, not oversharing, not emotional dumping, congruence. Because the goal is not to be the same in every room. The goal is to be more true in every room. Right? Open, honest, genuine, transparent, and authentic. And that's where we begin. So if this resonated, this is that public teaching layer for August inside the Insight and Impact Focus Group. We do take this work much deeper and further. And across the total emotional performance, this connects directly to emotional agility. Live for yourself first and loving your physical body, because how you show up in the world is never just mental. It's relational, emotional, physiological, and lived. See you next week.